Hey guys, I just wanted to take a few minutes here while I'm out farming thorium and go over BCT, otherwise known as Buff Cap Tracker. BCT is an add-on that is used by primarily tanks, I believe, but really anybody who is in danger of hitting the buff cap limit while they're raiding. The buff cap limit in Classic is 32. That includes any hidden buffs. So not all buffs are shown in the UI. So like you can see here right now, I've got 3 buffs shown, but BCT is reporting 5. That's because I have a stance. So as a warrior, your stances count as a buff. And also I have find minerals up, and that counts as well. So what Buff Cap Tracker does is it accounts for all of these buffs, hidden and non-hidden ones, and it displays them for you to show you how many you have until you're about to hit the cap. But more importantly, what it does is it allows you to blacklist certain buffs so that if someone casts a buff on you that is on your blacklist, it will immediately remove it. If you're out of combat, if you're in combat, you can remove it using a macro, and you can macro that into your abilities similar to a cancelaura type of a macro. So I'll show you how to set up BCT. You download it. You can download it from CurseForge. I think there's maybe a few other places out there to get it. I believe it originally was a weak aura, and then someone turned it into an add-on, and it hasn't had any updates in several years, but it still does work. There's a few caveats to it, which I'll go over. But if you're a tank, I would highly suggest downloading this add-on and learning how to set it up and use it properly. So to get into it, you just type /BCT and it brings up the menu, or you can just go, hit escape, options, and then go to your add-ons tab, and then it's right here. So you have the general tab, the auras tab, and the profiles tab. So the general tab, this is where you can, move the window. You can disable it. You can hide the anchor. I have mine over here. You can change the size of different fonts and whatnot. This is just kind of the general settings. For blacklisting, these are profile specific too, by the way. So currently I have 3 separate profiles set up. I basically have one that is very liberal. It allows almost any buff to be on me, that I use for 5 mans, 10 mans, 20 mans. Anywhere where I'm not unbooning, I don't have world buffs. And then I have a profile that is set up for when I am world buffed, but I'm not using any extra buffs for, like, for example, shield block. When you have a sword and board on, and you have a thorium shield spike, a thorium spike counts as a buff. Casting shield block counts as a buff. Things like that. So I kind of have a least restrictive, a middle restrictive, and then a most restrictive profile. But anytime you set up a new profile, you need to come in here to blacklisting and enable these two. So this is a passive removal of buffs, and it only works out of combat. So you can read it for yourself. It says right here. And the way that this works is, if you have, so the buff cap is 32. So what this says is if the number of buffs you have on you plus this buffer equals 32, it will start to strip buffs off of you out of combat until you reach that number. So and it says right here, if you want to disallow any blacklisted buffs, then you make this number 32. So I have it at 2 because I very rarely need to strip buffs out of combat. I actually have macros set up in my abilities that will remove any of these blacklisted buffs pretty much on demand. In combat is where you're going to see issues, and the reason is because even when you're world buffed, if you have full raid buffs on and world buffs as a warrior, and you have all your consumes up and weapon stones and all that, you're still going to be short, probably 5, 6, 7 buffs of the cap. Where you start getting in trouble is you run into combat, you cast Death Wish. There's one buff. Death Wish I think is a debuff, but you cast Death Wish, you cast a Trinket, you cast Blood Rage. You might, if you're tanking for Horsemen, you might cast the Reel, Nat Pagel's Reel. That's a buff. There's all these things that you don't normally think about as being buffs, but they are. and they do impact your buff cap. So that's in combat is when you really need to start worrying about them. So enabling this, what it does is when you have this enabled and you put this into a macro, it will automatically look through your blacklist and remove all those buffs, even if you're in combat. So you just put this into your, so instead of say /cancelaura blessing of salvation, you come into this app and you say, I don't want blessing of salvation, I want it blacklisted. This has that same effect as typing, cancelaura blessing of salvation. Direct heal indicators for healers. Could probably just be a separate video. I don't really use it. I have a healer, but I don't raid on my healer. This can be useful if you are trying to help the tank not go over their limit, but in all honesty, the tank should be responsible for their own buffs. And if they end up losing consumes, that's something that they need to manage. So this can be useful. I'm not going to go over it for this video though. And then loading, I just have everything checked. This is just when to load the add-on. The announcements, the blacklisting. I have everything. I have it loaded all the time. And it's up to you if you want to change that or not. I would suggest just leaving it on. So the first thing you want to do when you get the add-on loaded is there's going to be a couple defaults. So there's a default profile here. There's one called Warrior. And then I think it creates one for your character and server like most add-ons do. You can use those if you'd like. I made new ones. I have one called Four Horsemen, one called Hots Allowed, which is my current profile, and then I have one called World Buffs. And these are my this is the least restrictive, which obviously it says Hots Allowed, so Hots is healing over time. World Buffs is the middle restrictive, and then Four Horsemen is my most restrictive, and I'll explain why in a minute. Under auras, so let's go ahead and just create a profile. I'll show you how to do it. So you can either copy from an existing one, which I'm not going to do right now. We'll just do testing for stream, new profile. So as soon as you hit enter, that's now my existing profile. When I go into auras, so you have a type, a source, and a filter. So right now I have sources all, filter is all, buffs, debuffs, enchants, and other. So buffs are self-explanatory. If you scroll through the list, you'll recognize that these are buffs that can be cast by you, cast by other players. There's totems in here. There's the Halloween wands buffs are in here. Basically every buff in the game, or I should say most buffs in the game. There are a few buffs that I found that are not in this list, but there is a way to add them, which I'll go over later. There's debuffs, which, and for the most part, you cannot remove debuffs. So this Blessing of Black Fathom, I think, is one you can remove, which is probably why it's in here. That shouldn't be a problem if you're playing Classic. Enchants. So any enchant that is applied by a method other than a cast, which means basically a Librum enchant. So you can look through this list and probably realize it. It's any Librum enchant, any blacksmithing enchant, so like thorium spikes, mithril spurs. All of these count. So sharpening stones, these all count towards the buff cap. Now, for whatever reason, when the author of this add-on created it, they put all these in here, but they didn't by default check these boxes. So you need to go through here and check all these boxes because these all do count against your buff cap. So go through here and check all these, because what will happen is if you don't do this, and then let's say you have a fire resist set that includes the 20 fire resistance enchant, and you can put that on your helm and your legs. Your buff cap number over here will be wrong. Instead of saying, let's say, instead of saying 30 out of 32, it will be at 28 out of 32 because it won't be counting those two enchants against you. And you'll start losing buffs. You'll start losing elixirs and consumes, and you won't know why because you'll look at this number and you'll say, well, I was under the cap. What happened? And one of the reasons that I started digging into this add-on and trying to understand more about how it works is because that happened to me on a Four Horsemen attempt where on the pool I had I had the Nat Peggle reel on, and that gives you a buff for 10 seconds. It increases your spell hit, which is useful for taunt. I had that on. I had my other trinket popped. I had double fire resistance enchants, one on my helm, one on my legs. I had Blood Rage. I had it was something like 6 or 7 or 8 temporary buffs that were only going to last for the first 5 seconds of the fight, but they all count against you. And I lost Stone Shield Potion, and I lost, I think it was Mongoose, and I didn't notice until halfway through the fight. And I went back through the video and looked, because I normally stream my raids our raids so that I can go back and watch them later. And I noticed that my BCT was at like 28 or 29, and I started seeing buffs falling off, and I realized it was wrong. It wasn't counting all the proper ones up. So this is one reason why it was wrong. Another reason is it wasn't properly counting elemental sharpening stone for some reason. I believe even if you check it here, it still doesn't count towards the cap. I don't remember. I tested that at one point, and that was true, and I can't remember if I ended up resolving it. I can't remember if the item ID was wrong or something. But this add-on, like I said, has been out of date for several years. So I don't know if that's ever going to get fixed or not. But at least adding in the fire resistance has helped. And then I know a lot of tanks like to use the attack speed. Yeah, attack speed Libram. So I actually have that on. I think it's on my Lionheart helm. Yeah, Lionheart helm, attack speed 1%. So then those will show up. But you want to make sure that you do that, and don't forget to do that if you make a new profile, or if you do make another new profile, copy from an existing one. So once I have this one done, then I can copy from it. I would switch off of it. So let's switch off of this one. Let's switch to world buffs. And now I can copy testing for stream. So you can't copy from your existing one that is currently the active profile. So I'll go back to this. So testing for stream. So that's all you really need to do in here for enchants. And then for other, so defensive state, all of these are already checked by default. So for some reason these are and the enchants were not, but we can fix that pretty easily. So now you go to your buffs. Now this is where you're going to decide, what do I want to blacklist and what do I don't. So for tanks, there are certain things that don't give you any benefit whatsoever in a raid. Intellect is good if you're leveling weapon skill. You're not going to be leveling weapon skill in a raid, I wouldn't think. So you just go to this and then hit blacklist. Arcane power. This is mage buff. I don't believe it can be cast on anyone else. You can blacklist it just to be safe. Aspects. Let's see. For a second, I thought that was a level 1 running around over there. What's another good one? Berserker Rage. No, I normally don't blacklist that because I normally only cast that on like Saffron to get extra rage from the damage. But Blood Rage is a good example. So Blood Rage, I blacklist this on certain profiles and not others. So on my HOTS allowed, which is basically I don't have world buffs out, I don't blacklist it. On my Four Horsemen one I do. The reason is because Blood Rage gives you rage up front, and then it gives you an additional 10 rage over 10 seconds. The rage up front is 15, and I would rather have that 15 rage and then immediately lose the 10 over 10 seconds rather than have that buff accidentally strip off Stone Shield Potion or Elixir of Giants or Mongoose or some other beneficial buff, because especially if you're main tanking, 10 rage is really not that. That's really nothing. It's not gonna make or break things. Losing Stone Shield can make or break things. So that's usually how I decide, should I blacklist something or not. Would I trade this buff for Mongoose, or would I trade this buff for Stone Shield? Power Word Fortitude, of course, I'm leaving that on. Mark of the Wild, I'm leaving that on. But things like a Druid's Regrowth, as an example. Regrowth has a initial heal and then a heal over time component. The heal over time component is pretty weak. So, you might say, I'm going to blacklist Regrowth, but then Rejuvenation, I'm gonna leave it alone. Renew, you can decide if you want that blacklisted or not. Hots for the most part are better for DPS or classes, that are not actively taking damage. Maybe if you're an off tank and you're about to taunt in BWL, you're about to taunt, what's his name? One of the Drakes, Flamegore or Firemaw or one of those, Druid could hot you up before you taunt if they can see that the timer is coming up in a few seconds. That's probably, it depends on your strategy. It depends on, how your raid tackles those bosses. So for me, so basically, all you do is you run through here, you blacklist things, and then if you want to see your blacklist, like let's say you forget, this is a giant list of buffs. This is basically every buff in the game. Thorns is another one. Thorns, blacklist that. Nobody cares about Thorns. That's, even if it's 50 damage on reflect. I mean, 50 damage is nothing. Which it's not. I forget what it is, 25 or something. So you can go to the filter, go to your blacklist. So this will show you your current blacklist for your currently active profile, which my currently active profile is this testing one that we're doing. So I only have these 4 things, and it says right here 4. I have 4 things blacklisted. And then if I decide, later down the road, hey, I don't want to blacklist Thorns anymore. I'm in a 5-man. Let's say you don't have, for whatever reason, you don't have a 5-man profile set up, which I would suggest that you do. I suggest you have a 5-man small group profile, and then you have 2 or 3 raid profiles. You just come in here and just unclick it, and then it disappears. There's no apply button. There's no save. Everything just kind of happens in real time as you select it. So then when you go back to your all list now, it'll be back in here, and it won't show that it's blacklisted anymore. So in these buffs, so let's pick a buff that I actually have. Actually, let's do Blood Rage. We'll go to Blood Rage because I can cast that on a minute cooldown. So you can say track, blacklist, or reserve. Reserve is for the healing indicator module, which I stated earlier. We won't go over that. So having it checked for reserve doesn't really affect you unless you're using this for healing. You have blacklist, and then you have track. So when you hit track, it puts it over in this window. And so you can either track... what I use this window for is to track beneficial things like my world buffs. So I'll show you an example of that. So actually, first, before we do that, I'll show you how this works. So if we go back to general, under blacklisting, see, I created a new profile and I didn't come in here and enable these, so this wouldn't have worked. So I need to enable these. Now, what that means is now that blacklist for Blood Rage is going to take effect, but only when I use that click BCT. So the way that I have my macros set up is that I have in Battle Stance and Berserker Stance, my Bloodthirst macro is the same. It just casts Bloodthirst and that's it, and starts my attack. In Defensive Stance, I have one, you can see it's named Salve, and that's because it uses a different macro. And this will remove my Find of Minerals, removes the Argenton Commission buff, which is from my Mark of the Champion. It removes Blessing of Salvation, Greater Blessing of Salvation, Blessing of Protection, and then click BCT. So this is the portion that will invoke my blacklist. And then it casts Bloodthirst, and then it starts the attack. So what'll happen is I'm going to cast Blood Rage here, and I'm going to let it tick once or twice, and then I'm going to hit my button 2, and what it will do is remove that buff because that buff is in my blacklist. So now I'm Blood Raging, I got 7 seconds, 6 seconds, now I just hit 2 and then it made it go away. So that's kind of how it works in combat. And the reason that I have Blessing of Salvation and Bop and a few other things, I also have those in BCT. So if we go to, let's go to my most restrictive one, which is my 4 Horsemen one, and then go to my blacklist. So here I have 29 buffs blacklisted when I have this on. And you can see that Blessing of Salvation is in here, and so is Greater Blessing of Salvation. Is it not? Let's see. Scroll down to the G's. Greater blessing. Oh, it's not. Okay. So that needs to be blacklisted. And the reason why I have it in the macro is that just in case I accidentally move this or it gets replaced or something, or it's not working for some reason, the add-on isn't working, I want to have it baked into the default UI, which is the macro. That because this is probably the most important thing to get rid of as a tank is you don't want salve on you ever. Maybe you could make an argument for having salve on for I forget which one it is. It's Resuvius maybe, or sometimes I have salvation on myself for when I'm taking ads on Gluth when I'm kiting, just because I attack them for rage and I hamstring them and while I'm shouting. But there's almost never a case for a tank or an off tank to have salvation on. So I have that baked into the macro, and you can see just having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. This is basically my macro blacklist, and I'm already at almost the max characters. So trying to do what BCT does in the form of a blacklist would take you multiple macros. You'd have to chain them together, and it would start to get a little cumbersome. I also have those same things macroed into Revenge, so I can hit my Bloodthirst or my Revenge, and I also have Heroic Strike macroed into Revenge. So, and those are pretty much the 3 main abilities you're casting when you're main tanking or even when you're off tanking. So I'm constantly casting this BCT macro, which invokes my blacklist, which means that because your blacklist really doesn't mean anything unless you are invoking that click BCT in order to tell them the add-on, hey, strip these off of me. So I'm invoking the blacklist that I have applied, which is all of these buffs. So even if a druid puts on, let's say, rejuve, it doesn't keep him from rejuving me. What it means is as soon as I invoke that blacklist, it's gone. So I've had raids where druids have, messaged me afterwards, like running an Ani or a ZG or whatever, and I forget to change my profile. And they'll say, hey, I tried to rejuve you on a bunch of bosses, and it would just, on my UI, it was there and it was not gone. And then I threw it up again and then it was gone. Like I'm removing it every time I'm hitting any of these, 2 buttons, which is, about every, 0.2 seconds, because I'm spamming 2 and 3 basically the entire time I'm tanking. So, the buff is up there for a split second, but then it gets stripped right back off. Which is what you want. So it doesn't keep them from putting the buffs on you, but it strips them so that way, you don't end up with, now you have a regrowth and a rejuve and a renew. Well, there's 3 buffs. So if you were at 29, now you're dangerously close to losing Stone Shield or a Mongoose or Gift of Arthas or, whatever, or the buffs that you actually care about. And like I said before, there's some instances where maybe you, want to have rejuvenation. Just make another profile. It's much easier to make multiple profiles, and then you can change profiles with a macro than it is to come in here before every raid and just change this blacklist. So that's why I have multiple profiles in mind. I've got the 4 Horsemen, the Hots Allowed, and then the World buffs. So the way that you change those is you go into a macro and you do BCT profile and then the name of the profile. So BCT profile 4 Horsemen, BCT profile Hots Allowed, BCT profile World Buff. So whatever you name the profile in that, and then you just put the macro on your bars. So like right now, let's see what profile we are. Right now we're on 4 Horsemen. So I'm just going to hit the Hots Allowed macro here. And you see down here in the chat, it says profile change to Hots Allowed. So now when I go to my profile, it is the Hots Allowed one. And now when I go to auras and then blacklist, now I'm at 11. I only have 11 that are restricted versus the 29, or now it's 30, that were on my other list, on my 4 Horsemen. So you can see how, once you get this set up, how powerful it can be to help you manage your buffs and, keep things off that you don't want. It would be nice if there was a way, like I said, this add-on has been out of development for a number of years. It would be nice if there's a way to do some sort of a buffer of your beneficial buffs, and then let's say before combat is entered, if I have less than 25 buffs, because that's normally how I decide. So like if we go into a BWL, for example, I normally never unboon my buffs in BWL. And depending on, like if we only have 2 paladins, they might only do salvation and might, and I'm automatically stripping salvation, so I'm only getting 1 paladin buff, or I might only get kings instead of might. So it depends on like your raid comp, and it depends on, are you going to put world buffs out? Are you going to use every single consume? So these are all my consumes. Flask of the Titans, these are meters that show up with timers to show me how long until expiration. So I have Flask of the Titans, I have the Spirit of Zanza, Gift of Arthas, Rumsey Rum, Food Buff, Armor Elixir, Strength Elixir, Mongoose, and then Weapon Stones. If I'm an MC, I'm probably not using Gift of Arthas or Spirit of Zanza or Flask in MC. I'm probably using, these. What is this? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm using these 6, and then maybe on bosses I'll use Rumsey Rum. Probably not, because it's MC and I really don't need it. So right there, I'm saving 4 buffs, just for compared to Naxx for my own personal buffs. So then when I go into MC, or AWL, I say, yeah, I'm going to use Hots Allowed for every single boss and all the trash. Whereas when I go into Naxx, on the trash, I might have Hots Allowed. And then when we pull out our buffs and we unboon, then I'll switch to world buffs, which is, like I said, it's a little more restrictive. So if we look at this one, I've got 27, so it's actually pretty close to the same as the 4 Horsemen. I think I allow Rejuve on the, I kill Regrowth, but I allow Rejuve and I allow Renew. I think that's what it is. This one doesn't have Salvation on it either. So we need to go, even though I have it in my macro, Greater Blessing of Salvation, Blacklist. Yeah, so you can see in my blacklist, I got Regrowth blacklisted, but I don't have Rejuve and I don't have Renew. Those are allowed. So that's basically the difference. Is my 4 Horsemen, I don't allow any of those hots, and then my world buff, or I do allow 2 of those hots, but I reject everything else. Cheat Death is the Warrior Tier 3 8-piece, and it's not worth, in my opinion, it's not worth the buff that it takes up. Same thing with Bloodthirst. Bloodthirst does put a buff on you. So it lasts 8 seconds. The next 5 successful melee attacks will restore 20 health. In a raid, nobody cares about 100 health. I mean, Crusader heals you for about that, I think. Which again, you're not using Crusader for the heal. You're using it for the strength. I don't want a Bloodthirst heal. The buff from Bloodthirst to take over my food buff and kick it off, or kick off a Mongoose. That'd be terrible. I would always take a Mongoose over a Bloodthirst buff. Like I said, same thing with Blood Rage, Blessing of Sanctuary, Greater Blessing of Sanctuary. You got to make sure with the pallies you're getting both the blessings and the greater blessings. So that's pretty much it. That's how you use BCT. It's not super intuitive. It's a little more daunting, trying to learn how to use it. The reason I'm making this video is there's really not any videos out there of anyone explaining how to use it. I've had people in my guild and previous guilds kind of show me how to use it, and they would just say, oh, here's my export. They would export their string and then I would import it, but I still didn't really understand how it worked. So now that I understand how it works, it's a lot more intuitive. I set up these profiles. I click these before almost every boss in Naxx. If I go to BWL or MC or wherever, I pick which one of these profiles I want to use. You can switch it anytime. You have to be out of combat, but you can switch it, at any point when you're out of combat. Switch the profile. So it's really nice, and it's really helped me. Since I've done this, I have not lost a single consumable due to going over the buff cap. I've been able to properly manage it. So hopefully this video is helpful for you guys. Appreciate you guys watching.